Welcome to this week's episode of Purrfect Takes. I'm your host, Stephen Patton, and joined as always by my fellow co host and dear friend, Jacob LaQuire. It's been heating up in Charlotte. It's been heating up around the NFL. We're less than 10 days away from the first round of the NFL draft, and it's kind of exciting. It feels like Christmas, and we are currently in the middle of April, almost May. How's your week been?
Pretty good. Like you said, it's been getting hot, so we do need something to quench our thirst, and that's the theme of this week's beer of the week, Super Quench from Sycamore. It's a nice wheat ale with it says a hint of citrus, but it's really citrusy. Like you can taste like you're drinking orange juice, kinda. So I like that. But yeah, the draft season's heating up. Team visits are ending this week, so we're getting a lot more of them in. And like you said, it's like Christmas. I'm getting all fidgety talking about the draft, so we can get right into it if you want. Talking about team visits, we had I think seven more of the 30 visits, top 30 visits since our last pod. It was Austin Booker, an edge rusher, Jordan Morgan, one of my guys who we talked about, tackle, two D linemen, and I don't know how to pronounce his last name, Rook or Orororo from Clemson, and Mason Smith from LSU. Jackson Powers Johnson, the Oregon center, who's been kind of the riser, the guy of draft season. Troy Franklin, the Oregon receiver, and Trevin Wallace, a Kentucky linebacker, I believe, on Saturday or Sunday. So across the board, like different positions this past week, which is good because previously we'd kind of stuck to receivers, tight ends, running backs. There wasn't a lot of deviation, so it's good to see. I guess an assortment of positions coming in. And what are some thoughts, or what are some of your thoughts on the prospects we've had in, and some of these new guys? Like any new themes you see here or anything?
I think it's just making sure that you are addressing areas of weakness. You're leaving no stone unturned. The fact that we are interviewing or having Jackson Powers Johnson come in and seeing if he's a good fit, that hey, if he's there at 33 or he falls to 39, that's a guy that you want in the locker room that's going to mesh with what you're trying to do on the football field, I think is huge. And they've done their due diligence with trying to find guys on the defensive line, from edge rushers to outside linebackers to even a couple interior guys. We didn't get to him last week, but you were high on Austin Booker, and he's got a visit, and you mentioned that. And I think it's important to emphasize the importance of talking about these visits. So over the past two draft cycles, and Dan Morgan kind of comes from the fitter tree. He worked underneath them, same building, same front office in essence. And the Panthers, out of all their top 30 visits over the past 2 years, they've drafted seven of those players: two in the first, one in the second, two in the third, one in the fourth, and one in the sixth. So these are guys day two, day three that we're probably going to take one or two of these guys because we like what we saw on tape, and they liked what they saw when they had them in to meet with them from a coach and player standpoint. So these are huge. I don't know if you have any more takeaways before we kind of move on to the next thing, but that's what I kind of took away from us just addressing other areas of concern and need on this team and making sure that we did our due diligence.
Yeah, I agree with you there. I like a lot of the people that we brought in this past week. Like we talked about Jordan Morgan, Powers Johnson, Troy Franklin. To me, it seems like they're still leaning offensively. Like of the 18 visits we've had, or have reported visits, 11 of them have been offense. So I think they have a priority there, whether it's O line or pass catchers, to go early in the draft or something like that. I think they have their priorities straight, but yeah, I think leaving no stone unturned, like you said, some of these guys that may have question marks, like Austin Booker, who's played like 800 snaps total in college, which is super low. I think it was Max Crosby this year who led the league in snaps for a D lineman. He played 1,000. So
Yep.
Booker super raw there. Powers Johnson, I think it's been reported that the media is higher on him than like the NFL. So maybe they bring him in thinking he'll fall to 33 or 39, like you said. So yeah, just doing due diligence and stuff there. I like all the visits we've had so far, and hopefully we'll be able to convert a couple of those guys to the process blue in the fall. Like you said, the Panthers have been not reliant, but they've been prone to drafting people who have been there for 30 visits the past couple of years. Obviously, Scott Fitterer is no longer in the building, but Dan Morgan and the coaching, or not coaching, the college scouting staff is the same staff that was in place as far as we know of. So maybe they follow a similar trend there. Draft guys that they bring in, be it for a reported visit or a secret visit. Like we talked about, there are 30 of these visits, yet 18 have only been reported so far. So they are bringing people in that we don't know to get a look at. So maybe they bring in a guy like Adonai Mitchell or like a Keon Coleman or something that we don't know about, and they really favor that kind of guy. So we'll see there. We'll see exactly in 10 days now, assuming the Panthers don't trade up into the first round, who they take at the top of that second round, at the top of day two. But getting into the kind of mock draft season or spirit of things, we've done a couple of different things the last few weeks, right? We did a tandem mock draft. We did like a what was last week? We had separate, or no, we did separate ones. We did a tandem one, and now we did some before we recorded, and then we'll post those after we post our episode and see what people like more and stuff. But I think it's good to have separate mocks because there's obviously separate ways the draft could go, right? And so it's cool to compare. Like you had certain people fall, I had certain people fall. Mock drafts are just fun in general, is my point.
Yeah. No, they're a fun exercise, and I know we kind of already moved on from the top 30 visits, but out of all the NFL teams, we're tied for first with the most drafted players that we had in for visits. So for Panthers fans, that's a cool kind of statistic to kind of latch onto when you see some of these names kind of pop into the building. And like you said, there might be some secret visits. The team we're tied with are the Green Bay Packers, and as we get into this mock draft, I've seen a lot of Panthers Nation talk about getting a guy like Jackson Powers Johnson. You kind of complete the O line rebuild and you get value there at either 33, and it's mostly 33 that he's being drafted or mocked at. And the issue is, especially when you look at some of the analytical numbers, is that when you take like a non-premium position at that kind of pick range, you don't get as much surplus value as you would getting a wide receiver, an edge, an interior defensive lineman, some of those positions that have higher upside. And because of that, you gain more surplus value on the rookie contract and you're able to spend that money in free agency. So, like you said, we're getting into these mock drafts. What I had is at 33, I was given a trade offer by the Cardinals to move back to 35, and I would get pick 90, and all I had to send was 33 and 141. I jumped on that, and Johnny Newton from Illinois, who we'll be talking about later in this episode, we'll be covering the interior defensive lineman class. He fell. And I don't think he falls out of the first round personally. I think this is more like media bias. But if he was there, that's an absolute steal. And I understand we kind of rebuilt the defensive line in the offseason, but for me, that is a cornerstone guy moving forward that allows you a deep rotation, that allows some of the younger outside linebackers that we've drafted over the past couple of years to kind of take a step and develop, because they don't have to worry about so much on the interior side and they can just go after and get after the quarterback. So that's who I got. What was your first pick in your mock draft?
It's been a receiver that I've liked throughout this entire process. It's my receiver four. I ended up trading back as well to 34 with New England. They moved up one spot. I think it was for Michael Penix. I don't quite remember, but they gave me next year's second and their pick like one pick later. So I took Adonai Mitchell from Texas. I think he's really a guy that could be a true number one receiver, one of the few guys in this draft that could be a true number one immediately and down the line, like long term. I think the stuff about his effort is really overblown. I think he just dealt with adverse situation at Texas with poor quarterback play and things of that nature. So I really like what happened there. And then the rest of my stuff and the rest of your stuff, I like both of it. I'm just gonna read mine down the list, just knock them out real quick because I think we have similar interest there. Both of us like Ben Sinnott. I took him at 60. Ricky Pearsall, the Florida wide receiver, I grabbed him as well. And then guy we talked about last week, Jonah Ellis, Utah edge rusher. Got him. Got Daquan Hardy, the Penn State DB, and Dylan Johnson, the Washington running back. So a good assortment of offense and defense there, and grabbed a couple of second rounders next year with a couple of trade backs. So I like that one. But you, I think, went more big names, I think, across the board for you.
Yeah, so obviously started off with Johnny Newton, who I think is a really, really good interior defensive lineman. And we'll talk about what we love about him soon. But at 39, I get Jalen Polk, a guy that is really high. Like So where we talked about Jackson's Powers Johnson being higher in the media relative to like the NFL kind of minds, Jalen Polk's the opposite. He's a little bit lower on media boards, but teams love him. And there's a lot to like about his game. He's an absolute dog. He makes difficult catches. He's a solid route runner. And then, like you said, we both took Ben Sinnott. You took him at 60. I took him at 65. And then a guy that we've had in for a visit, just like Ben Sinnott, is Jalen McMillan. And I took him at pick 90 that I got from the Cardinals. And to me, when you're able to add those two guys from the Washington wide receiver room, two guys that you could argue are top 50, top 75 players in this draft class, I think that's huge, especially when wide receiver was such a need last year for this team. I personally love and can't get enough of Audric Estime. I think he's great. You look at some of the advanced numbers outside of like obviously the 40 testing, but like what he did on the football field, he is just a bruiser back and would complement Chuba really nicely this year. Got Mason McCormick, gave us some more interior offensive line depth, which I think is huge. And then got your guy, Akeem Dent, at pick 240. He's not super high on consensus boards, but I think there's a lot to like about him, about being kind of like a box safety. And I think that could be great. Having an enforcer that can make big tackles in big moments is always key to have. That's part of the game is not only making plays with the football, but also stopping the other team from making plays. So that's kind of where I got to. Only took two defensive players. Felt like we addressed the defensive side of the ball relatively well in free agency, and feel like the attention now, come next Thursday, Friday, Saturday, need to be on offense.
Yeah, I'm with you there. I think both of us and the majority of fans are going to be disappointed if we don't walk away with at least two people that could be maybe not starters immediately on offense, but guys you feel good about playing like a good amount of snaps this year because the offense was the problem last year. They invested a ton of money in the O line this year. They spent not as much, but they've gotten some good rotation and starters on defense. So I do think the focus of the draft needs to be on offense first and foremost. But we'll see come, I guess, Friday, unless we trade up on Thursday, what the Panthers end up doing. But I'm pretty happy with both of our drafts. And to be honest, aside from not having a first round pick, I think we're in a good spot for the rest of the draft. So I'm looking forward to seeing what's going to happen next weekend.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to see kind of the philosophy Dan Morgan and Dave Canales roll out for team building. Gives you an idea of just how they want to go about building the team. We've kind of seen what they wanted to do in free agency. Now we get to see kind of their mindset when it comes to drafting and developing younger players. So moving on around the NFL, guys that have gotten that next big contract or another big extension. First guy we're going to talk about, drafted in the same draft class as Brian Burns, is Josh Allen. And he got a mega deal very similar to kind of Brian Burns in terms of AAV. And he got 150 over five, so pretty much hit that 30 million annual average value. And it begs the question, like, does Jacksonville, like, do they return to form what they did a couple years ago? I mean, they had Trayvon Walker, now Josh Allen. They signed Armstead this offseason. This is a pretty loaded D line. Does this give off vibes of Saxonville back in 2017, or are they still kind of like a piece or two away that could be added through the draft?
It's crazy to think about that that defense was 7 years ago, but I do think they are taking a step towards that. Like you said, invested in Eric Armstead, Josh Allen, Trayvon Walker for first overall pick. Um, I do think they are invested in the defense, and I think they still need to add something like in the secondary. But I like what they've done so far. They also brought in Darnell Savage from the Packers, so clear investment on that side. I think the offense needs more of an investment, though. They lose Ridley and replace him with Gabe Davis, which I'm not going to say that's a one-for-one replacement there. I think Ridley's the better player, and I'm not quite sure what role Davis is going to play in Doug Peterson or Press Taylor's scheme. I do think they need a little help on the O line as well, but we'll see what route they take. I think they're at pick 17 right now. Yeah, pick 17. And I've seen a lot of fans mock maybe Brian Thomas Jr. there or one of the top corners there. So there's a clear consensus on what their needs are from among Jags fans and NFL fans in general. But I'm not sure what direction they go in next week. But one thing that they do need to consider, and one thing I've heard on Twitter, like rumors about, is when is Trevor Lawrence's extension going to come in? Because obviously they paid Josh Allen. He's going to be a lifer, or at least the next, excuse me, like his first 10 years of his career or something like that. Trevor Lawrence has shown promise. He had the great playoff run a couple years ago, but they fell flat last year. So I wonder if they're going to try to get that extension done a year early, like they did with Burrow and Justin Herbert.
Yeah, I don't know if the plan is to extend him this offseason. It may be to kind of just lower some cap numbers moving forward. A lot of times these extensions that get tacked onto the rookie deals, a lot of people hear these big numbers and think that the money's coming in like day one. And there is day one and year one cash flows for sure. But a lot of times it's 2 3 years down the line that these cap hits start hitting. So he's currently signed into this year. And then if they were to extend him this year or next year, the 5th year option would be included within that deal. And I would assume it would probably be like a 5 year deal that we've seen that Burrow, Herbert, those even Lamar Jackson last year, those kind of players have gotten in the past. And with the way the cap is increasing, I'd expect the APY, not the guaranteed money. Like people, when you look at some of these contracts, need to focus more on the guaranteed money. But I think the APY is going to be 60 million or north of. And he's going to probably be the first quarterback that breaks the quote unquote, just the true 60 million, but inflated value wise. 5 of the last big contracts: Burrow, Rodgers, Josh Allen, Russell Wilson, and then Justin Herbert is almost on the cusp. Those guys are inflated terms. If they were to sign the deals they did this offseason, it would be $60 million. So that's the range I think he's going to get. I think he'll get less guaranteed money than a lot of those quarterbacks because he doesn't have the playoff visits. He doesn't have the accolades, first team all pro, MVPs to his name. So I think there's an element that he'll get a lot of good money. The question is just how much of it's guaranteed.
Yeah, I'm with you there. I think the question becomes, should they extend him this year? I always think extending early is the right thing, and I have faith that Trevor Lawrence is going to be good. But like you said, he doesn't have the some of the accolades or the success that other top QBs have had. And I was just thinking about comparing him to Herbert. Herbert doesn't have a ton of success in the postseason or anything as well, but he has like a higher reputation, I think. Herbert does than Lawrence, despite him not being a number one pick. I think his regular season success and numbers also contribute to that. Like if you look at him versus a Joe Burrow, a guy who made the Super Bowl, a couple playoff runs, I think it's going to be interesting, like how the NFL and the Jags view Lawrence in terms of extend now versus next year before the. Actually, I think his 5th year option is this. Like they have to pick it up this year, right? Because the guy we're about to talk about was in the same draft, so it's going to be interesting for sure. And going into that guy, Devontae Smith, the receiver for Philly, he signed an extension on top of him having his 5th year option picked up. So it's a $75 million over a 3 year extension, but then you have the 5th year on top of it. So really, it's like 90 something over 4 years. So I really like that deal for them. It keeps him under that blanket that Jefferson, Lamb, Chase are going to hit in a couple years, maybe this offseason. So I like that deal for Philly.
Yeah, Daniel Salib, a great cap expert, someone who knows a lot about how contracts are structured. He predicted this past weekend before this deal was actually official, and it was going to be like a 75 over three. I think he had like maybe 74 over three. But exactly like you said, he's going into year four. They're tacking on the 5th year option. So they have him locked in for the next 5 years. And you just see like the fact that they have AJ Brown, Jalen Hurts, Devontae Smith, they got Saquon Barkley, they've extended Goddard recently. When you look at all of that, they are trying to keep that offense together. And that's not even including guys that they have on the offensive line between their tackles and Lane Johnson and Jordan Mailata. And so they just have guys all over the place on that offensive side. They are not afraid to spend money. And because they extend some of these guys early, or because they get guys that are still in their prime, they're getting surplus value, even though they're paying quote unquote top of the market. And it's smart work by Howie per usual. And I only expect them to do great things with kind of this nucleus. Now we'll see if Jalen Hurts is going to be able to elevate them like he has in the past on 2 years ago when they went to the Super Bowl. But I like this signing. It keeps Devontae Smith a top 15 pick on the team. and just shows their dedication to making sure that they keep their players, which bodes in favor for guys like Jalen Carter and Jordan Davis, who will probably most likely stay with the team unless Howie Roseman decides to wheel and deal in the future.
Yeah, you talk about AJ Brown, Goddard, Jalen Hurts, Saquon Barkley. Their offensive line gets paid too and gets paid early. Mailata just had another extension, I believe, a couple weeks ago. He had a big extension when he was first with the team. Landon Dickerson is the highest paid
Yep.
guard in the league now. They would always pay Kelsey when he was on the team. Lane Johnson is really the right tackle that broke the left and right tackle gap, really. It's still not the same, but he's the one that got that first big deal to move right tackles up. So they're willing to pay on offense. And I really like the model that they use, like extend early. And then if something goes wrong, don't be afraid to trade him, right? We saw it happen with Wentz, and hopefully Hurts doesn't go down that path. But should it happen, I'm sure we might see them draft a QB like in the second or third this year just for insurance. So really like what they're doing there. Devontae Smith is a favorite of mine, obviously. Bama Heisman winner there, so good to see him getting paid. Another extension, maybe not as high profile as Josh Allen or Devontae Smith was, DeForest Buckner, the defensive tackle for Indy. And I think with the Derek Brown extension, along with Christian Wilkins, Justin Matabuke, a lot of the D and Chris Jones as well, a lot of the D line extensions that were done, I think the writing was on the wall for Buckner because prior to this, he would have been a free agent next season. So 46 over 2, I feel like is fair value. That's just about 23 AAV, below guys like Derek Brown and all the other guys that I mentioned, but still kind of in that top 10 range. I think that's fair for him. Maybe a little pricey, but Indy locks up another one of their guys. Their theme this offseason has been bringing their guys back home, and seems like they're following that formula at least up until the next couple years.
Yeah. I like this signing by Indy. You retain kind of one of your stars. They traded for him after the 49ers, I believe, went to the Super Bowl in 2019. 49ers at that point had so many stars, had a lot of money allocated elsewhere to where they couldn't keep him. And so the Colts were able to kind of benefit from that. And I think this is a good signing. Like you said, it's in market with what we're seeing other interior defensive linemen getting paid. And it bodes well for a guy like Christian Barmore with the New England Patriots, also another former Alabama player. So the interior defensive line market has moved tremendously over the past half decade. Part of that is what Aaron Donald and Chris Jones and some of these other guys have brought to the game and showing the value of getting pressure from the inside. And that's only going to increase. And so the pay is matching. This has now become a premium position. It was kind of like a fringe premium position, but now it kind of is in that quadrant where it's like, no, people retain these kind of players and they pay them big money to stay kind of where they're at. So speaking of a guy that may be on the move, probably via trade, maybe he does get extended and the 49ers move some things around, but it's Brandon Ayuk. The 49ers, their social media accounts unfollowed Ayuk, and Ayuk unfollowed them. So obviously this stuff happens with a lot of different players every single offseason. Do you think Ayuk gets moved? If he gets moved on draft day, where do you think is a good landing spot for him? And are the Panthers a contender to get him?
They should be. They should be willing to give whatever it takes to get Ayuk. I liked how we got Deontay Johnson for basically just Dante Jackson, but Ayuk's on a whole other level. This guy was an All-Pro this past season. Probably one of the best separators in all of the NFL. So if the Panthers can get him, you need to get him. Like 33, 39, and like Mingo or something for 31 and Ayuk or whatever it takes. I would get him, but I personally don't think he's gonna get moved. Uh, if at all, not prior to the draft. I think if something happens, it's going to be like in June, like during the dead period. But I can't see them moving Ayuk just because of how important he is. I know you kind of think that if they're going to move somebody, it should be Debo, and I agree. I think Ayuk is clearly the better player, better receiver, and I think if they need to jettison one of the pieces there, if they want to end up paying Purdy, or if they just want more money, I think it needs to be Debo because I think Ayuk, Kittle, and McCaffrey are too important to get rid of. McCaffrey's the best running back in the league. Kittle's a top three tight end, and as we saw this year, per All Pro and per Pro Bowl and per everything, Ayuk's a top 7 to 10 receiver, and you just can't say the same thing about Debo.
Yeah, I mean, you could probably a couple years ago when he was first team All Pro, he was racking up yards on the ground, through the air, just the absolute yak monster. But his injury history just kind of makes me worried moving forward, especially with McCaffrey getting older. Like if they were the jettison for whatever reason, Ayuk on draft day or in June, and Debo goes down, Christian McCaffrey goes down, and it's just Brock Purdy and George Kittle. I'm sorry, but I don't think Kyle Shanahan's going to be able to generate some of the mismatches he's had in various concepts with routes and the run game and how that sets up some of his play action looks. Like a lot of that just I wouldn't say like goes in the trash, but it's not going to be as effective. And jettisoning a guy like you said that's a top 7 top 10 wide receiver in the NFL right now just doesn't make a lot of sense. Now if he were to go, Pittsburgh obviously has a need at wide receiver. I think he'd be a perfect complement to George Pickens. There's been talks that maybe Jacksonville has interest. Trent Baalke has gotten former 49ers players. He obviously didn't draft. I don't think, I may have to go back and look. I don't think he drafted Brandon Ayuk, but that's they have kind of a hole at wide receiver one. They have draft capital. We mentioned our team as well kind of has a need for wide receiver. We have some capital where we could move and go get him. But I think a team that's a little bit under the radar, I said this last offseason. I think it's still true, especially with some of the Rashee Rice, the allegations and the charges being pressed against them, that the Chiefs should be in business. Now, I don't know if the 49ers really want to trade their star player to the team that just beat them in the Super Bowl. But if I'm the Chiefs and I can trade a first round pick and I can get Ayuk, I, I'd do it personally. I think that gives Patrick Mahomes a wide receiver one over the next several years over the course of that new contract. And that'd be huge for trying to keep pace in the AFC that just continually gets better year after year.
Yeah, I'm with you there. I think another team along that similar vein as the Chiefs would be the Bills.
Yep.
Obviously, they just trade away Stephon Diggs. They don't re-sign Gabe Davis. They do bring in Curtis Samuel, but I'm not sure that Curtis Samuel is a receiver one. And during Brandon Beane's tenure, he hasn't been a big receiver drafter early. So I think that if they're able to turn 28 and whatever else you need into Ayuk, they should certainly do it because what it seems like they've done this year just on the surface is that they're punting this year to keep the window open next year and a few more years, right? Like the Super Bowl window. Obviously, they're going to be playoff contenders as long as Josh Allen's healthy and not going Superman Josh Allen that throws 5 picks a game. As long as everything's fine there, they should be in contention for the playoffs year in and year out. But without top tier help, I don't think that they can make a deep playoff run. So if they are willing to do that this year, they should be all in on Ayuk, especially with the cap space they freed up from Diggs going forward. Like obviously they're eating the dead cap this year, but next year and like going forward, I think that'd be a good spot for them to pay Ayuk if they can get it done.
Well, this is, and Jason Fitzgerald talked about this on his last podcast. The Bills' cap situation, as of right now, they have, I think, a little over 3 million, and that's before signing their like rookie class. So they don't have a lot of wiggle room right now. They would probably have to, at some point, restructure somebody else even for a trade because at that rate, it would have to be a sign and trade by the 49ers, where the 49ers are altering his contract where his cap number this year is like stupid low because right now it's this year for 2024 it's 15 million. It's a little over 14 million, but like in that mindset, they don't have the room to take on his contract. And even with an extension, typically your salary cap for that year is like 6 to 8 million because it gets rolled over into future years. So I don't know if the Bills can really pull it off. We'll see. Maybe they can pull something off. Brandon Beane is a very creative general manager, and he's one of the best at what he does. But that's a situation I don't know if that'll play out. Now, you have on here that other receivers that have held out kind of this offseason, just a little bit. A
Well,
soft
they're just
holdout
not
is,
going to the voluntary workouts, and obviously they're not
yeah.
voluntary, but all three of these guys have expressed concern about their future contract or like want an extension. And obviously, the big one is Justin Jefferson. I think everybody thinks he's going to be the first non QB on offense to break that 30 million per year threshold, and I could see it. He's the best receiver in the league, and with the uncertainty about the Vikings QB situation and everything, he has every reason to hold out, or not hold out, but not attend every like work event. You know what I mean?
Yep.
And then obviously you have CD Lamb as well, same draft class. I think they're playing a little bit of chicken there. Probably Lamb's agent and the Cowboys probably waiting till after Jefferson gets extended because once he breaks that threshold, Lamb, Jamar Chase, they're going to want those big deals. And then Cortland Sutton yesterday, he's announced he's skipping voluntary workouts because he or his representation announced that he's unhappy with his contract. So we'll see there because they trade away Judy. They don't. I think Tim Patrick is healthy again, but he's been a health risk the past 2 seasons. So I'm not super sure what's going on with the Broncos. This seems like a bit of a transitionary period for them. So if they want to retain Sutton, because they had a chance to trade him at the deadline, they've had a chance to trade him kind of during the free agency frenzy last month. If they want to keep him, maybe they need to rework his deal a little bit. I don't know, but those three people or those three receivers have not gone into their voluntary workouts this week. All for
So
valid reason, I think.
So what's interesting is, and you remember this from last offseason, Justin Jefferson and CD Lamb are represented by the same agency. And similar players who held out represented by the same agency and looking for a bigger deal were Nick Bosa and Brian Burns last year. And their agents, the agents were underneath the agency of CAA Sports, and that's who represents Jefferson and Lamb. So they're not only playing chicken, they know how to play chicken, and it works. These are wide receivers that will most likely get deals where it's $30+ million annual average value. Like that is going to be the price tag for these kind of guys. Jefferson will reset the market, I guarantee you, kind of like Nick Bosa did. And the guy that's going to be right underneath him, if not right in line, is going to be CD Lamb. So that's just how it's going to play out. That's how that agency does business. They get top of the line deals for top of the line players. And so Cortland Sutton isn't represented by CAA Sports, but he does definitely want to be compensated. We'll see if the Broncos kind of restructure his deal to just make him happy. He may end up coming back and playing, and he loses that game of chicken. But for the other two wide receivers, I think they know how to play this game because of who represents them.
Yeah, he's clearly not on the same level or echelon as Lamb and Jefferson. Probably two of the top 5, 6 receivers in the league right now, I'd say. But he's wide receiver one on his team right now. And if they're gonna bring in like a Bo Nix or something, or like a Penix maybe in the second round, maybe they trade into the late first round or to pick 33 because we hold that first day 2 pick. If they end up getting a young QB in there, I think they are gonna want to have an established receiver. We saw what happened with the Panthers when he didn't. But yeah, I think they're going to have to work something out there. On a lighter front, I guess, there were a lot of new uniforms unveiled this week. Obviously, the big ones were the Jets uniforms that were yesterday, I think. To me, they don't look super different, but they definitely look better. I can say that. And I like the new Jets logo. I can like the little word mark that looks like a football and it's like on the top of the lace. I like that a lot. But it feels like the Jets change their uniforms every 3 years or something. So
But does
maybe
it really change? Like we
well,
talked about the decal changing and some of that,
and
but I
the
just
front of the jersey doesn't say like New York Jets anymore. It's just like the plain numbers, which I like. It's kind of old school. I think their last jerseys were associated with the Darnold and Wilson era, Zach Wilson era too much. So I think they had to kind of exercise those demons. So I'm all here for it. I think when we see them on TV, they're definitely going to look better. But the jury's still out there. The Texans also, they some of their
they got
uniforms
worse.
leaked. They got uh, real quick. They got leaked a couple weeks ago. Um, the leaks look bad. I'll just say that. I'm not a huge fan, but they have it's supposed to be 4 uniforms. There was rumors that they might include, I think it's called Houston blue or something, which is like the Oilers blue. I haven't seen that on any of their jerseys. Like they've through various things they've shown off the white, the navy blue and the red jersey. I haven't seen it anywhere there, but maybe in like an alternate logo or something. I don't like how they look in the photo room, but maybe on the field they look better. But I agree with you. I'm not a huge fan of those reworks.
Yeah, not a huge fan of those. The only other one that got announced were the Jaguars are bringing like a throwback uniform into their mixture. And this does beg the question because now teams can have 3 different helmets per season. Obviously, we'll have cool helmet decals like the Houston Oilers that are now the Tennessee Titans, the Philadelphia Eagles, Kelly Greens, the New
The
England
Falcons' old
Patriots.
ones.
Yep,
are
the
good too.
Falcons like go back to the 90s. Like
The Dirty
some of
Bird,
those are
yeah.
are going to be now staples, and it's like, okay, what about that third one, that alternative, that almost Thursday night color rush of old? And that begs the question, Panthers Nation, do you guys see in the future like a fully like white helmet almost with the Panthers logo? And that could be cool. We have the all black ones that go with our all black uniforms. We wore that this past year when we played the Atlanta Falcons at home, and they look clean. And it'd be cool to see like an all white kind of helmet uniform combo on a Thursday night or a Monday night primetime game moving forward. So I don't know how you feel about that. I've seen kind of it circulated around the Twitter space, but I personally think it would be really cool.
Look, I'm all in on white helmets. As you know, I hate the silver helmets. We don't have silver jerseys. We have silver pants, but silver, like it's not a shiny silver. It's kind of gray, like the Giants gray pants and stuff like that. So I've never liked the silver helmets. I don't think they match with anything that we wear. So I think that having like a white helmet be our main jersey for like the white and the blue jerseys, and then the black helmet for the black jerseys, and like maybe the blue jerseys too. I think that would be awesome. But with this new three helmet rule, we may be able to see, like you were talking about the Eagles, they have their midnight green, they have their Kelly green. But if you remember, I think it was 2 years ago, they had their blackout helmet as well.
Hmm.
Now they can have all three of those. And so I think it's going to be really cool to see. It's cool to see that they're loosening up on like super old and archaic uniform rules. I think the big one next would be like you can have like a black jersey versus a red jersey. That'd be cool. It doesn't always have to have one white uniform. I think that's the next rule they need to break, just so we can see some different color combinations and stuff like that. But this is a good step in the right direction, and I think the Jags throwback new rule or new announcement is going to play into that because they had some pretty interesting helmets back in the day, like during the MJD era and stuff like that. So that should be fun to see this year. But something we are going to see next weekend is the draft. And we've done every position so far. On offense, we worked back to front. On defense, we've been working back to front. And we have the last position, which is my favorite to watch, and that is interior defensive lineman. And you talked about one of them earlier, who's my defensive tackle two. But my defensive tackle one, who we just did the post about him the other day, is Byron Murphy the second from Texas. I think he could be the first defender taken, although I think Dallas Turner probably will be, but he deserves it. He's really good at everything. Low center of gravity, good footwork, good at splitting gaps, really good vision, active hands and arms. He's just the complete package, and he really helped I would say a Texas defense that doesn't have a lot of stars be good enough to carry them to a college football playoff berth this season. And he's somebody that a lot of teams that need D line help should be looking at next weekend.
Yeah, this is a stud. It is a huge reason why the Texas Longhorns were in the college football playoff this past year. He led not only this year, but all defensive tackles or interior defensive linemen since 2014 in pass rush win rate at 19.6%. He's tied with Kalijah Cansey from last year's draft class. And that's just, it's amazing. Like, this is a guy that was able to just get after the quarterback, shoot gaps. He's great with his hands, good footwork. My question to you is, as a guy that's watched kind of multiple draft classes, how does he compare to like a Jalen Carter or a Kalijah Cansey from last year? I feel like he's better than Kalijah Cansey, but is he better than Jalen Carter was last year?
It's going to be a no from me. Carter was in the running for the best player in the class last year. I'm sure if you ask a lot of people, they'll say he was. I think he was second next to Will Anderson. But I think Carter was like a rare, I don't want to say generational, but like a really rare talent at defensive tackle. Somebody worth taking in the top five. I think he ended up going 9 or 10. I can't remember which one. But he also had some off-field stuff there that contributed to his slide. But he was just a special talent, and that's not to take away from Murphy, who I think is really really good as well. But I think Murphy's better than Kalijah Cansey. As you know, I wasn't super high on Kalijah Cansey last year. I think I had him like in the mid 30s on my board last year, but I certainly would have Murphy better than that. He's a top 15 player to me. I think I have him at 11. But I think he'd be a really good fit, really anywhere. I wish he would fall to the Panthers, but he won't. If we get into my perfect take a little bit early, I think the Rams have a giant Aaron Donald sized hole on their defensive line now. So I think that'd be a really good fit for them.
Yeah, and if it's not Byron Murphy who's there, who I could see being taken in the top 15 picks because he is that good of a player, like you said, he's 11th on your board. But the guy right after him is 14th on your board, and that's Jerzan or Johnny Newton, as I was referring to him earlier. And he fell all the way to me at 33, but his talent, when you look at how he played at Illinois, is just flat out astounding. This man led the FBS with 39 pressures as a defensive tackle. So somebody that lines up over the zero, like pretty much a zero tech or a 4-eye defensive line tech in that range, he just dominated there. And he's a guy with great hands, with great speed, and just I don't understand that mocks that have him outside of the first. Like personally, to me, I feel like it's just media hype on all these other like flashier positions. When you have somebody this talented, he's not going to fall that far, in my opinion. But that's somebody I could also see the Rams taking.
Yeah, I'm with you there. I think when we get this deep into draft season, and we still have 9 days to go before day one, it's been draft season since really since Michigan beat Washington in the final, right? So I think it's like these people have been so high for so long. People want somebody else to talk about or something like that. I think that's kind of contributed to his fall. I've also read some things that he might have like a foot issue or foot injury during
He
this
didn't
last
test at the
season at
combine.
Illinois. Yeah, but he did. Yeah, I think he's
No, that's what I'm
good.
saying. It's just some of those medicals, like regardless,
Yeah,
like his play was outstanding, outstanding. It's more one
right.
of those things that you wonder if, okay, if he's dealing with a nagging foot injury and he's not fully healthy, that may cause him to slide.
And I agree, that's another reason for 30 visits, right? So you can do medicals and be more secure about taking a guy that might have some medical questions or injury history. But to me, I think this guy's a first rounder. If he's there at 33, like I said with McKinstry, even more so with this guy, I'll fly to Detroit and forge the card and hand it to the commissioner or whoever's there on day two myself. I think he is, if you just want to watch tape, his tape is probably the best of any defensive lineman, or at least the most fun. He maintains his gaps super well. Good footwork like Murphy, but is super fast for his size. Like he's able to get
Hmm.
into the backfield very quickly, and it's something that you don't see a lot from defensive linemen. And I think that's a strength of his, but it can also play to his detriment. I think that he can get engulfed in blocks because he's so light on his feet sometimes. But other than that, I think he's really, really fun to watch, super strong and explosive. If you need somebody to make a difference on your D line, I think that's the guy. And looking at teams like around his range, let's say like from the Rams, because obviously the Rams need somebody there, or like the Rams could use an edge rusher too.
The
I think like a
Bengals
team like
could right there.
the Bengals, I think you're right. I think a team like Dallas could also use somebody.
Ooh, yes.
They're obviously they lose Dan Quinn, they lose Dorrance Armstrong, who was one of their rotation D linemen last year. They did draft Mozzie Smith, I believe, at pick 25 last year is when they picked. So they have invested in that D line, but I think they could use some juice there. We talked about Tampa Bay. I think they're set at defensive tackle, but if they want to add some edge presence or just strength along the line in general, I'd go for it. And then Arizona at that 27th pick.
Hmm.
I'm set on them taking Marvin Harrison Jr. I hope that's what they do. They should not trade back there, but this is a rebuilding team in general. And like you talked about, defensive tackle, interior defensive line, that has become a premium position in the NFL. So if you're able to get a guy of this talent there in the first round at 27 to help build that backbone of your defensive line, I think you got to go for it.
You have to. I just and it there's too many teams like you said, Rams, Bengals, because the Bengals lost a lot of their interior defensive guys and they
Hmm.
haven't done a lot in free agency to bolster that. And I think it's because they know some of these guys are available in the draft. Like you said, the Cowboys, maybe they're not fully sold on Mozzie Smith and they want to get a more polished product that can just get after the quarterback and wreak havoc. Or like you said, the Cardinals, they're in a standpoint where they could add really anybody on defense. And if a guy like that falls to you at 27, you got to take him. Not work on a project. Take a guy that's a premium position, that's a true bona fide star, apart from maybe his medicals don't check out. Maybe that's why he falls. But turning on the tape, like you said, there's just too much there for me to go that you should take a lot of the other guys that we've talked about, like Darius Robinson or Chop Robinson, or some of these wide receivers or corners that may sneak into the first. But moving on, the gap between these two guys and the next guy is a little bit wider, and it's Tavondre Sweat. He's 36 on your board. He had a kind of like an abysmal, like I will say, combine. His raws compared to a lot of the other guys that tested here was below 5 at 4.28. He is a big man. He is a space eater. My big thing is where we talked about medicals with Johnny Newton. I'm worried about the speeding ticket Tavondre Sweat had, and that may cause him to fall on most draft boards. You look at Henry Ruggs recently, Rashee Rice most recently. Some of these players that have had these extracurricular off the field issues have not bode well. You even mentioned earlier Jalen Carter. He fell last year after being considered one of the top 2 prospects in last year's class. What are your thoughts about him as a player, not so much of what has happened off the field?
Yeah, so just to be clear, I made my board before that incident occurred. So I probably would have moved him down a little bit because of that. But I think as a player, and you talked about his raw score being low, it's low because this guy is like 360 pounds. And despite that big size, he's able to move quite well, I think, for that size. Now, we talked about Byron Murphy being the star along that Texas defense. Tavondre Sweat was right there with him, wreaking havoc just with his size, his strength. He's like the space eater of all space eaters, like a true nose tackle. Like I look at him and think of Dontari Poe, kind of back in the mid
I
2010
like that
Chiefs
comp.
days.
Yeah.
Um, I think he's able to play like that. I think he can create pressures, even though he's not the fastest kind of guy. He has active hands, a good motor, like he plays throughout the play and stuff like that. And I don't see him as being a first rounder, or even now with some of the recent stuff, I'm not sure he'll go in round two either. But I think he could be a good reinforcement, or like at least first and second down nose tackle pretty quickly in the league, just based on his ability to move at his size and just take up multiple blockers.
Yeah. And so my question is to you, because you brought up a great comparison of what Sweat does and what Byron Murphy does. Byron Murphy is the guy that's going to shoot the gap. He's going to get after the quarterback, and Sweat's just the space eater. He is a big dude, and he moves very well, like you said, for a big man. Murphy and Newton are guys that are around 300 pounds. Tavondre Sweat's like 350 pounds, like you said, probably closer to 360, depending on when he weighs in during the day. And my question to you is how does this Texas duo that helped propel the Longhorns to the college football playoff compared to the Georgia duo, now Philadelphia Eagle duo, and Jalen Carter and Jordan Davis? And because of how that duo worked together, is there a team in the NFL that might go Byron Murphy and say the first and take a flyer on Devondre Sweat at the end of the second, middle of the third? Because I think pairing those two, like you said, how they are able to complement each other is just so needed when you're trying to stop not only the run game, but get after the quarterback in the pass game.
I think that's really interesting that you bring that up. Georgia, talking about their D line first, obviously they had Jordan Davis, the Packers, Devontae Wyatt, and Jalen Carter. But they also had like what, 10 other NFL
Yep.
draft picks that were on that defense that started. Then they had guys that would rotate in the next year. Texas didn't really have that. If you want to look at their defense on draftable guys this year, we can look at the two defensive tackles we've talked about, maybe Jalen Ford, one of their linebackers, but they don't really have a ton of, I guess, NFL depth there on that side of the ball. It was really those two dragging the defense, along with the offense having superstars like Adonai Mitchell, Xavier Worthy, Jonathan Brooks, and Jatavion Sanders, who was in for a 30 visit with us. But I like the Georgia duo quite a bit better, just because I think Jalen Carter is special. I think he's better than Murphy, and Jordan Davis, despite his lack of NFL consistency and success, I think was very good at Georgia. I think the big question, however, is separately, how do they work? The two Texas guys, that is, because even when Sweat wasn't on the field, Byron Murphy, I think, was productive. But vice versa, I'm not sure that Sweat was able to accomplish as much when Murphy wasn't on the field. So I think he'll have to go somewhere where they do have a guy that's able to penetrate from the middle and create pressure from the interior. But if you're able to reunite them, say like, let's say I don't want to use the Rams because Kobe Durant had a really good rookie year, but let's say the Bengals, right? Because they lose Reader, but they have solid edge rushers. Let's say they take Murphy at 18 and then Sweat at whatever their third round pick would be, I guess 82 around there.
Yep.
Let's say that they do that. I could see that working out because they have the edge rushers. They have a sneaky like top three linebacking core and Logan Wilson and Jermaine Pratt, and then they have some young guys in their secondary. I could see that working out. So I think it'd be a worthwhile project to do that, like to take both of them. But the draft is so unpredictable, and with Sweat's off the field stuff, I'm not sure how far he's going to fall. Some teams may look at it and say we can get the best out of him despite that. Like maybe the Patriots, they're really good with character guys and stuff like that. So who knows? But I do think it'd be worthwhile to take a look at adding both of them. Whenever you get the chance to add a successful duo like that, I think it's always worth taking. Like, I don't think a team's going to be able to add Adonai Mitchell and Xavier Worthy. I think the team probably with the best chance is us at 33 and 39 if things work out there. But whenever you're able to add a successful tandem like that in college and you're sure that they can fit to your system in the NFL, I think it'd be worth it. But
Yeah.
I'm not quite sure that that's going to be the case come Thursday and Friday and Saturday next week.
Yeah, we'll see how that impacts his fall if the Bengals take Byron Murphy, say in the towards the end of the first, and Tavondre Sweat's there at the third when they pick. I think that would be a great addition if he were to fall there. But like you said, the draft is very unpredictable. But looking at the Bengals roster, I mean, they have Sheldon Rankins, who they signed this offseason to kind of replenish, and they have BJ Hill. And that's kind of their 1-2 punch right now. And I think if you were able to add those two guys, that'd be a phenomenal rotation. It'd help you kind of re-solidify some holes that were left from DJ Reader and some of the other guys that they've had in the interior in recent years. So we'll see what happens next week. That's more just me kind of spitballing an idea and seeing a successful duo and seeing if you can pretty much take those same two guys and keep them in a similar system to where they can just wreak havoc. So next guy on the list, he's really close to where you had Sweat, and that's Chris Jenkins, son of former Panthers legend, All Pro. And what's interesting is that even though Dan Morgan played with his dad, there hasn't been an official team meeting with him in terms of like a visit, and that's intriguing to me. I understand that we sign Ashawn Robinson, we extend Derek Brown, we signed Shy Tuttle last year, but it still seems a little odd that we don't try to bring in a guy that has ties to the Carolinas.
Well, not that we know of, right? Like we talked about, there's still 12, 30 visits that quote haven't happened or haven't been reported. So maybe he was in the building. Maybe Dan Morgan called up his old buddy and said, "Hey, Chris, how's your son? Give me his strengths and weaknesses." And maybe that was good enough for him. But our current Chris Jenkins in at Michigan right now versus the former Panther Chris Jenkins, I think couldn't be more different players. Our
Yeah.
Chris Jenkins like just dominated with his size, right? He was like I don't want to say he was Tyvondre Sweat sized, but he was able to take two blockers, kind of consume them, and let some of the other defensive linemen rush the pass like Mike Rucker and stuff like that. I think Chris Jenkins is a little bit different. While he is routinely double teamed, it's not because of his size, it's because of his ability to split gaps, use his hands, and use his speed to get around players. I think he was like the backbone for the Michigan defensive line en route to an undefeated season and a national title this year. I think he's very strong. He has good vision. Like one of the things that I look at with defensive linemen, and this comes from legendary defensive lineman coach Pete Jenkins, worked with LSU, worked with the Eagles. He's really one of the best in the business if you want to look at film clinics and stuff like that. One of the defensive lineman's like main goals every rep, especially on pass downs, is to be able to keep your eyes in the backfield. So when you engage your assignment or when you're hitting the offensive lineman, keeping like half of their helmet to the side so you can at least have one eye looking into the backfield. Chris Jenkins is super good at that. I think he's gonna like thrive in the league because he's able to do that routinely. And I think I don't know if he'll be a first rounder, or he might be a like end of the second round kind of guy. I would love for the Panthers to have him, not just because of him being like a legacy player, which is awesome in and of itself. Talk about Dre Kirkpatrick Jr., who's at Alabama now, another legacy player. But I think it'd be awesome to have him there, and I think he'd work really well with Ashawn Robinson and Derek Brown if Ashawn Robinson plays nose for a lot of the like the rundowns or the early downs.
Yeah. No, there's a lot to like about his game. Like you said, he's not necessarily like his dad outside of the fact that they both play interior defensive linemen. He's more like Murphy and Newton that we've talked about. He's the
Hmm.
guy that's going to shoot the gap. And I referencing a comment made by Doug Farrar, a guy that's an NFL editor with USA Today. He's an AP All Pro MVP voter. He thought his best move was his ability to spin off the guard. And
Hmm.
it's very apparent that this guy has the ability, the quickness to just get in the backfield, to wreak havoc. And you want to put him next to a bigger body, like you said, at Ashawn Robinson. Or if you were able to pair a Chris Jenkins with a Tavondre Sweat, you go second, third round. That could be an interesting duo with just those two styles meshed together. And that's what you want is kind of the duo there, not so much of, oh, we're going to go defensive tackle like twice in the draft. No, you want to go defensive tackle where it's you have one guy that's taking up blocks and one guy that's able to shoot the gap. And what that does is it just creates mismatches all within the interior of the offensive line where someone's going to win. Whether it's the guy that's supposed to take on two blocks, he gets single teams, or the guy that is usually just the gap shooter is able to kind of get by the guard and make a play in the backfield. So moving on to the next guy, out of the past four guys, this is all in line with the consensus. Byron Murphy's number one, Newton second, Tefondre Sweat is third, Chris Jenkins fourth, Michael Hall in consensus is number six. But watching this guy's tape, looking at his raw score at a 9.57, the highest that we've seen out of the guys we've talked about today, he ranks 48th in your board, so he's a top 50 player, impressed at the Shrine Bowl, really twitchy guy. I think there's a lot to like about his game. What do you think Michael Hall needs to do to improve at the next level to take his game to where he's considered as one of the better interior defensive linemen?
I think the one thing I wrote is that he's able to get turned easily. I think that's he allows like combo blocks or teams that double team him to be able to move him. Like one guy gets his hand on his back and is able to push him out of the way, things like that. So he might be a little light on his feet, but other than that, I think he's really good. This is one of the more underrated players in the class for me. It would not surprise me if he goes like top 40 or something like that. I think he's really, really good, good vision, holds his gap well, and like Murphy, Newton, Jenkins, he's a good penetrator from the interior. I think he can rush really well. Good vision, like I said, really active and violent hands. Like he chops at offensive linemen like quite often. I think he can play a role really, really early. And like I said, I wouldn't be surprised if he goes in the top half of the second round. I was looking at the consensus Jack Lichtenstein's consensus board, and they have him at 65, and I think that's underselling him quite a bit. Like you said, I have him as a top 50 player.
Yeah, no, I mean this is a really special player when you turn on the tape. I know I talked about Chris Jenkins, like his best move kind of being the spin off the guard. When you turn on the tape for Michael Hall, it feels like some of his highlight plays, it's his spin move that it's just so impressive and just so fluid and so smooth. And it's just like he understands how to time it well and how to get past guys. And I think it's a very valid point that you bring up that some of what he needs to work on at the next level is being able to take on double teams and not getting pushed out of the way with double teams, because that's how you're going to make an impact at the next level, is making it difficult for teams to double team you and just nullify you. And at this rate, like if he takes that step and he has a year or two to develop, he could be one of the guys that we talk about over the next few years as being like a top 10, top 15 guy at his position. So I think he's got a lot of upside. Like you said, he's undersold. And part of that is he doesn't play a glamorous position. You don't see these guys necessarily racking up a ton of sacks throughout the year, but that doesn't mean that they aren't causing an impact. None of the guys that we talked about had over 10 sacks in college last year, but they all made a tremendous impact. Like we talked about, Byron Murphy and Tavondre Sweat were a huge reason why the Longhorns were in the college football playoff. Chris Jenkins was on the national champion team, Michigan Wolverines. So when you look at some of these guys and the impact that they had, not only at the college level and how that translates to the NFL, it's important to remember that these are guys that should be considered, and it shouldn't be the flashy wide receivers and corners that are obsessed over because they do one thing really, really well, when you have some of these guys that are so multifaceted and so talented at what they do.
Yeah, defensive lineman, I think, other than QB, probably has the most responsibility of any position on the field. So it's always like really cool for me when they get recognized, and that's probably why I have them a little bit higher on my board compared to consensus and things like that. But there are two other defensive tackles, defensive linemen I want to touch on real quick. Braden Fiskey from Florida State. He was a combine warrior this past year, tested really well in a lot of things. Wouldn't you know it, he's another transfer, right? Florida State can only get transfers to be good players there, not their own recruits. But he's really good. I think he doesn't command combo blocks or penetrate as often as you would like, but he also played with some superstars like Jared Verse, so he didn't really need to when he was at Florida State. But I think he's a really, really good athlete that can be molded into a certain player if you give him time. So I think he's really good there. And Leonard Taylor from Miami, who was a really, really, really high recruit. He was a 5-star initially when he came in. Um, I think they misused him quite a bit there. They played him a lot at nose tackle and one tech, which is like on the center shoulder. But I think he was more of a 5 tech there, like a an odd front defensive end, kind of like Darius Robinson, who we talked about last week. Like twitchy, super strong, splits the offensive lineman well, but you can't really do that when you have the center and the guard over you who are both like 330 and you're like 310, right? I think they misused him quite a bit at Miami, and I think in the league he can be a starter. Maybe not day one, but at some point in his rookie year, if they use him correctly as an odd front defensive end.
Yeah. No, I like you talking about some of these later round guys. Unfortunately, I didn't get to these guys this week with my film allotted time. But I'm sure they would be phenomenal contributors. Again, they aren't necessarily as good as the players previously mentioned, but there's a lot of upside. And if you're able to kind of pocket these guys away and into a deeper rotation and a team that already has an established defensive line room, I feel like those guys are only going to grow to become really good contributors. So we're at the point now. We're at the Purrfect Takes segment of the podcast. It's the name of our pod, and it's what we do every week. And my perfect take is that Johnny Newton is not only a first round pick, he is a top 25 pick. And top 25, the Cowboys pick at 25. I don't think he falls past them. I think he'll either go to the Rams or the Bengals. But that's my perfect take this week. You alluded to yours earlier, but for those listening, if you want to just kind of harp on it again, and I like it. I think it's a good one, and kind of correlates with what I even said.
Yeah, I think I did talk about it a little bit earlier, but the Rams suddenly lose the best defensive player of our generation, probably. So they have a hole at defensive tackle now. Like I talked about, Kobe Durant, their rookie. I can't quite remember where he went to school, but he had a really good rookie season. I think he had 9 sacks from the interior. They drafted Byron Young from Tennessee last year on the edge, so they do have some young pieces there, but they need a stalwart in the middle. So I think whether they pick in 19, maybe they move back to 22 or something. The back half of the draft is like a crapshoot with trades and stuff, so you never really know who's going to pick there. But I think they're going to find their Aaron Donald replacement in the first round this year. If not, maybe they trade to like 35 or something if Johnny Newton falls or something like that. But I think one of the top two guys that we talked about, Byron Murphy and Jerzon Johnny Newton, will be a Los Angeles Ram come April 28th or whenever the draft ends.
Okay. I like that perfect take. We're both high on Johnny Newton and what he's going to offer at the next level. Catch us next week on Perfect Takes, where we'll be going over our mock drafts for the first round and what we think will happen. This isn't what we would necessarily do if we were the general managers across the league, but what we think will play out on Thursday night. If you guys have any questions draft related or Panthers related in terms of who we should target, shoot them to us at perfect_takes. We are on Twitter, Spotify, YouTube, and Apple Podcasts. And you can find and follow us there. So until next week, we will catch you guys.